In early 90s, I went to school in upstate Nye. It was my first experience away from home for any length of time. This particular college town was built around a beautiful lake, and because of that, when summer came to a close, everything closed up with it. Picture a vibrant happening center turning into a barren ghost town overnight. With the cold weather, the sky went from beautiful blue to a dull, lifeless gray and remained like that until spring. One of my housemates was also a weed dealer, which was convenient for me as I was a chronic stoner at the time. We would make these elaborate dinners where every course featured weed in the recipe. The results were full bellies, stoned minds, and huge messes to clean up. Our dinners quickly became a thing that other people from other houses wanted to get in on. So we would have guests over, and the rule was they had clean up after the meal. Somehow they didn't mind, and ours quickly became the house that everyone wanted to hang at. One really dark, cold, and windy night, we had 5 female guests from another school. I had a girlfriend at the time, so I behaved, but the rest of my housemates hooked up and a good time was had by all. This was a weeknight, and when it came time to leave, their car wouldn't start. Naturally, they come knocking on my door, as I was the only one with a car. It's around midnight now, and they live a good hour away, so I reluctantly agree to take them. My housemate James agrees to come with. There were no street lights, and it's dark and cold as fuck. Then it begins to snow. On a good day, we hardly knew where we were going around our own school, and this is in a totally different area. It was a tense white-knuckle ride the whole time, but eventually we got there. The house where they lived was a converted estate with a long driveway and huge iron gates. As I turn into the driveway, the snow really starts coming down. We can see 2 dull red lights off in the distance. As we get closer, we see that it's not a car, but an elaborate stagecoach lumbering through the snow. As we go to overtake it on the road, we all look over and see that it's a huge black stagecoach being pulled by a team of black horses. The red lights we saw were lanterns on its sides. The driver is also dressed in black, sitting pin straight and looking straight ahead. He doesn't even glance at us. It's like we aren't there. Everyone in the car saw this. We asked the girls if this was a thing where they lived. They said no. They never saw anything like it before. At the time, we just thought it was very strange, like, why would someone be out in a stagecoach after midnight in a snowstorm? I remember thinking, maybe this is just how they get down up in the country. It didn't occur to us right away that it could be anything else. After we dropped them off at the house, we turned around to leave, both fully expecting to see that stagecoach again, as their house was the only thing at the end of the driveway road. Instead, we saw nothing. No horses, no hoof prints, no other tracks, but our own from coming the other way. At that point, it finally dawned on us both, no doubt a delayed reaction from dinner. James and I realized that we may have just seen not only a ghost, but ghost horses and a ghost stagecoach. It's been more than 30 years, and anytime I see James, we still talk about what we saw that night. A few years ago, I moved into a 1-bedroom apartment in Melbourne, Australia. It was my first time living on my own. The apartment block had been built in the 1930s. I'd been there for a few months when I came home from work one day and went into the bathroom. I saw something strange. A wooden board, which had covered a hole in the ceiling that led to a small attic space, lay fractured in 2 pieces on the ground. I examined the pieces. The board was an inch thick, and it would have taken Bruce Lee to break it. I thought the landlord had sent someone to work on the attic. I was frozen stiff with fear. Someone is up there for sure, I thought. I emailed pictures to the landlord, asking if anyone had been there with an undertone of annoyance. Since she hadn't warned me, her reply read, "Please call me as soon as you are able to." I called, and she explained that her last 2 tenants, Heidi said, the same thing happened. She promised to replace the board, and she did. A month later, I woke up one night around 4 a.m. My body was covered in goosebumps. It felt like someone was rubbing his or her hands on me. Everything was silent, but then I heard a dragging sound coming from above my bed. It was as if someone was pulling a sack of potatoes. I froze, convinced someone was up there. There is no way an animal could make that sound. After 5 minutes, I worked up the courage to turn on the light, armed myself with a cricket bat, and walked to the bathroom. That's when I saw that the new board covering the hole was broken in two. I felt sick. The dragging sound had stopped, but I heard something else. Whispering. The sound was clear and coming from the attic. It sounded like children's voices, and I could hear one sentence repeated over and over. It's your turn. It's your turn. I switched on every light in the apartment to make things feel normal. It was 5 a.m. and dark outside. I watched TV to try to unwind. Then a fuse blew. My pet budgie, Dexter, whom I kept in the kitchen, usually never made us, but he started squawking, like he was being strangled. I'd never heard him make those sorts of noises. He was screaming. I grabbed my car keys, ran out, sat in my car, and waited there until the sun came up. When I saw people walking their dogs, this comforted me enough to go back in. The front door was open, but I figured I might have forgotten to close it when I ran out. I went to the kitchen to check on Dexter, but he wasn't in his cage. I felt sick again. All my windows were closed, so I looked everywhere inside. When I walked to the bathroom, I heard splashing. Dexter was half drowned in the toilet. I took him out, washed him, and dried him. I was so confused. At 8, I called the landlord and gave her a watered-down version of the night. "Oh, wow, you heard the whispering too," she said. I stayed in that apartment for another 18 months. I heard the whispering on a few occasions, and twice the board covering the hole in the ceiling moved. Although I live elsewhere now, the landlord recently called. She said that her new tenants had begged to speak with me about some of the stuff that's been going on there. Forget it. It's their problem now. The Ghost of Oxford Milford Road. When Brad Culp was a student at Miami University in Oxford, Ohio, there was a rumor that the town was one of the most haunted places in America. When Culp started an on-campus magazine, he couldn't wait to write about several of the area's most famous fandom. Not long after his story published, though, he kept finding himself thinking about one ghost in particular, the Ghost of Oxford Milford Road. As the story goes, many decades ago, probably sometime in the 1940s, there was a young man courting a young woman in a rural part of town. Because the woman's parents didn't approve of the match, each night he visited under the cover of dark. After her parents went to bed, the young woman would sneak out of her farmhouse and flash the lights of her parents' car 3 times. Then her young suitor would ride his motorcycle down the road. One night, he took the turn right before her house a little too sharp, says Culp. The motorcycle went one way, he went the other. His injuries were so severe that he did not survive. Rumor has it, however, that his love-struck ghost still haunts this stretch of Milford Road. Curious Culp, his girlfriend, now his wife, and a friend decided to head out there one night to see if they could verify the tale. His girlfriend was worried she'd be completely freaked out. She believes more in that stuff than I do, Culp says, but he was mostly concerned that his suspicions, that none of this was actually true, would be confirmed. On this particular night, as Culp passed the abandoned farm, an idea came to him, and he pitched it to his girlfriend. How could she not say yes? Though reluctant, she relented, and Culp turned a short way into the farmhouse driveway. He killed the engine and flashed his lights 3 times. No joke, there was a single headlight that appeared 3/4 of a mile down the road, Culp says. You saw it start to come, going pretty slow. It kept coming and coming. My wife was freaking out. It was coming closer and closer. As a collision seemed imminent, Culp turned on his car's lights. He expected to see a kid on a bike bailing out from his prank now that he'd been caught, but there's nothing there. The light is just gone, he says. They got out of the car. They walked around trying to figure out what it was they could have seen. To this day, we still talk about it. I saw something I cannot explain, he says. If you get him and his wife around a campfire, they'll swear up and down that the story is true. And if you're ever in Oxford, Ohio, consider parking for just a few minutes on Oxford-Milford Road at night to test your own nerve. Throughout Latin America, you'll hear variations of the story of La Llorona, or the Wailing Woman. Sometimes she's lost her husband. Sometimes she's lost her children. Sometimes it's both. But in La Parva, a ski spot in the Chilean Andes, the Wailing Woman is named Lola, and everyone in the area swears they knew her before she died. A local restaurant owner said he dated her. Pro skier Drew Tag says, adding that the ski patroller, he heard the story from pointed at the exact hut where this tale takes place. The story starts on a nice day in peak ski season. Lola and her young son plan to spend the day on the slope. What can happen in the Andes? A thick fog rose up from the valley, which often precedes the arrival of a real storm. The clouds enveloped the two as they were making their way down from the top of the mountain, and they lost contact with one another, Tab says. Desperate to find her son, Lola began screaming his name as she ran through the thick fog. Unable to see clearly, though, she stumbled down a steep slope and began sliding toward a rocky couloir. By chance, a local lift operator who was returning to his cabin came across her body. He was afraid she was dead, but on closer inspection, he found she was still alive, just barely. Tap says her body was covered in lacerations from sharp rocks, and the only word she said, in the faintest whisper, was her son's name. The lift operator worked to carefully pull her body to his cabin, which was just up the hill. He bandaged her cuts as best he could, and then ran to fetch the doctor. Together, the doctor and lift operator made their way back to his hut, the fog hanging thick. When they arrived, though, the bed was empty. Just the bloody sheets remained. Neither the woman nor her son were ever found, TB says. But locals report hearing her wail for her child whenever they're near that lift operator's cabin. This was a few years back when I was in Nice and drove the school bus back home every day. There was news about a 3-year-old little girl that went missing in our community, and it took me by surprise because in my community there wasn't any high rates of serious crimes, just minor ones. But this one just had the whole community worried and heartbroken for the missing of a young little girl. And of course, when it touched news reporters, it was all over. The TV news making it more heartbroken to the whole city. As investigations went on, it was revealed that the father told a story to police and investigators, stating that he left her outside the house for punishment for not drinking her milk, and later when he went to check up on her, she was gone, but her body was eventually found about a week later. Culvert, which was the same one my buses drove above every single day back from school, and no one knew until the community found out and started putting flowers and balloons for that little girl in that culvert. Later, it was revealed that the father lied about the story he told to police and investigators and confessed of throwing her lifeless body in the culvert because she choked to death while trying to assist her to drink her milk and was scared of calling the police immediately, so the father did get charged and was sentenced to life in prison. I'm hoping to find someone who can help me understand what is happening to me. The sooner I can put a label on it, the sooner I can take steps to getting rid of it. A couple months ago, I had a series of weird experiences in my home. I would be laying in bed, and I would feel my bed vibrating or shaking. I don't live in an area that's prone to earthquakes, and my bed is usually pretty sturdy. Eventually, I was able to blow it off as my body was subconsciously shaking or something. However, the shaking didn't seem to stop, and it eventually escalated. Now, instead of shaking, I could feel sudden pressure on my bed, as though my dog had jumped up on the bed and was walking around the mattress. My dog sleeps in the same room as me, so this is not unheard of. However, when I opened my eyes, she wasn't on the bed. I tried to tell myself something in a dream had spooked me, and I freaked myself out. But it kept happening, night after night, several times a night. Always the same thing, the shaking of the bed followed by the sudden pressure on the mattress and the feeling that something was walking, crawling over the mattress. I eventually sought the help of my religious leader, and my house was blessed. I stopped watching horror movies and listening to my horror podcasts. If it was something spiritual, I wanted to make it clear that it was not welcome in my house. For a while, things got better, and I pushed the events to the back of my mind. Then, last night, it happened again. The shaking, the pressure, the walking. I honestly am at a loss as to what to do. I do suffer from depression and anxiety, but I don't think it's caused by my mental illness. I've heard of sleep paralysis, but I don't know if that's what I'm experiencing, as I'm not paralyzed while this is happening. Any idea or suggestions are welcome and appreciated. I'm worried I'm going to go crazy from stress and sleep deprivation.
The Red Note. When I was a kid, I used to dream every night. But as I got older, my dreams slowly faded with time. There was one dream I continuously had for an extended period of time, and it never fully evolved past a certain point, until one night. It would always start with me being in a cabin, a warm, cozy cabin in a huge pine forest. I remember laying in a bed on a cozy summer evening, looking at the cream-colored curtains that would sway in the breeze of the open window. Every time something would make me get up and go outside to the vast forest, the giant pine trees reaching for the amber-colored sky as dusk was settling in. The dream would always start off as this, but in the beginning, I would wake up before much else happened. The dream would slowly progress to me walking around this cabin, until one day I saw a red note on the ground. It was no larger than a regular business card you'd see in your regular store. As the dream progressed with time, the warm glow of the sky would get darker and darker and eventually turned into a moonlit sky with no clouds. But every time I would find an oddly placed red note on the ground, placed on the ground in front of a large parting in the vast trees, in what looked like an endless road into nothingness. Slowly the dreams would feel closer to nightmares, as every time I would find this note, I would begin to hear faint screams in the distance, what almost sounded like foxes yowling, but to me, it always sounded more humanoid. The last time I remember this dream, it started from the very beginning, the sway of the curtains in the breeze, but it was now pitch black outside. No more comfort from the warm amber glow of the sky like previously. Something in me still stepped outside of the cabin, and there it was, the red note, like all the other times. There was never anything on the small slip of paper. It was a deep crimson red. Something was different this time. As I picked up the slip of paper, my whole body froze. I would hear what sounded like a woman wailing in the distance. Blood-curdling screams of someone or something down that parting in the trees. This time I couldn't see what was up ahead. The moonlit sky was overcast. It was darker than ever before. The last thing I remember is the croaking of a woman as if her neck had been snapped. The blood gurgling in her throat was now directly in front of me. I couldn't see her. I was jolted awake from the dream when a hand came out of the darkness, reaching for my face. To this day, I haven't had that same dream, and it's been close to 20 years. As I got older, I began to realize the vague parts of the cabin I remember was that of my grandmother's house. Her sister fell out of a large pine tree on the property and snapped her neck on impact before my mother was born. People are scarier than anything paranormal. This is a true story of something I experienced. It must have been over a decade by now. I was a kid at the time that my dad had bought this quaint house on the outskirts of a little town. It was a decently sized home with a big backyard overlooking the marshes and unused farmers' fields, and the only entrance to it was either through the house or across the large fields. To put into context how this fits into the story was because my bedroom at the time of living with my dad was situated at the back of the house, facing the big backyard. I remember one night very vividly, some 10-12 years later. I was sitting in my room doing digital artwork on my computer. It was something I loved to do as a teenager, and usually I'd listen to music with headphones on. The way I was sitting had me facing semi-away from the big window in my room, the largest in the house. I had my blackout blinds drawn, and it was the only room in the entire house that had the light on, and I'd assume from outside you'd see slivers of light through the edges of the folding blinds. The menu was between 2 and 0 a.m. I was peacefully minding my own business when I hear a massive slam on my window. It was a dull but loud thud, and what I thought was a shout. My dad was sleeping peacefully in the room next to me. How he didn't hear anything at the time still amazes me to this day. I remember just sitting there, shook, no clue what I just heard, until it happened again. I heard it clear. Somebody was outside in the backyard. Whoever this was had no reason to be there. I remember being too scared to open my blinds. Instead, I got up, just staring at the window, not taking my eyes off it. Something I'm thankful for to this day was I went with my gut feeling. My gut was telling me to grab a flashlight and check the front. This was an old house, so I would have to leave the comfort of the house to enter the barn to get to the main entrance of the house. I remember shining my light through the glass in the door. The window had the frosted film for privacy, but sure enough, I barely got the flashlight lifted 3-4 inches to the glass before seeing the coat of whoever was out there. The real kicker. Absolute terror set in when I realized the door hadn't been locked this entire time. I managed to lock it and run inside. And the first thing I grabbed was a bread knife. Not practical, but when your adrenaline and fear is coursing through your brain, it's the last thing you think of. I remember trying to wake up my dad, who was passed out like a drunk sailor, to see whoever was outside. We never found the man, and he never came back. Had I not locked that door, prank or not, I dread to think what would have happened to me. I've seen some shit in my life, but people will forever scare me.